The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Safeway stores.
I'm putting the finishing touches on champignon sous cloche, the grand finale to our mushroom show today on The French Chef. Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child. We're doing mushrooms today, all kinds of ways to use them. You know, you can hardly think of French cooking without mushrooms. The French call them champignons. And in this country, we have such beautiful, fresh mushrooms like this. I think it's a good idea for us to know quite a few recipes on how to prepare them because they're so delicious and so versatile. We've done sort of bits of mushrooms here and there in our various recipes, but I thought it would be a good idea to assemble things together so that you'd have a more of a complete picture of them. Now, how you buy mushrooms is, if you're a market, you buy them in a big 3-pound basket like this, and you can also order a 3-pound of fresh basket. And I think the best way to buy mushrooms in a market is always to buy them loose so that you can look at them. If they're all covered in plastic in a little bag, sometimes the underneath ones are not very fresh, and you really want to get a good look at them, and I'll tell you how you can see whether it's a good mushroom or not. Now, this is an excellent fresh mushroom. You see where the cap joins the stem, there's no separation at all. These are all cultivated mushrooms, and that's the kind you buy. Now, here is another one which is a little less good. You see there's a line of separation between the cap and the stem. And then here's one that's still a very good one, but it's not as fresh as the first one over here, because you notice, you see there, you see no line of separation, and here there's this enormous line where the gills show. And this is still a good mushroom, but if the cap had flattened out and there wasn't any nice curl in it, you could then see that it was fairly stale. And also you can tell by feeling them. They should feel nice and firm and sort of velvety. And when you buy them, you want to store them in a plastic bag in the refrigerator. And they will keep for several days nice and fresh if they're well closed and well chilled. But you do not wash them at all until you're just ready to use them. And then, when you're going to wash them, you would first trim them. I have a little washing set up here so that you'll see what is done. Now, see, on this mushroom you can probably see there's a little bit of dirt on the edge, which there is sometimes, and you would trim that off. And if the end of the stem has any dirt or sort of roughness, trim that off. In Europe, when you buy mushrooms, usually they've left all the dirt on the end of the stem because that, they think, keeps them fresher. So trim them all, the end of the stem. And then, any mushrooms which have separated from the cap, the head is separated and shows the gills, it's a good idea to take the stem off and just hold it in one hand and bend the stem with your fingers. And with this one, you don't have to take the stem off because there can't be any sand or grit on the inside. And with this, the same way, we can leave the stem whole. But with this one, I think it's wiser to take the stem off. Now, you don't have to wash them. You can just rub them dry to be sure all the grit is off. And when they're whole and there's no separation, you then can just rub them. And then, just before you're going to use them, drop them into a bowl of cold water. And you want to wash them very, very quickly. Rub them with your hands. And then take them with your hands and lift them out. And by lifting them out, you leave all the sand down in the bottom of the bowl. And if there are more than 1 or 2 grains of sand in the bottom of the bowl, you should wash them again. But you always do it very, very quickly because mushrooms are rather spongy and they can pick up moisture if they sit in the water. And then as soon as you finish washing them, take a nice clean towel and dry them with, oh, there goes a mushroom. Well. Now, and then dry them off. This is particularly important if you're going to saute the mushrooms. And what with washing machines, you can wash your mushrooms very quickly. I mean, you can wash your towels very quickly. I've never tried washing them in a washing machine. There. Now, these are going to be various ways of how to cut mushrooms. Now, if you want to slice mushrooms, you can do them in several ways. If you have the whole mushroom like this, you can slice right down through it. And then you have a very nice looking mushroom with part of the stem. And that makes a sort of a pretty slice. Or if you've had to take the stem out, you just hold your cap and just slice right down like this. And the slicing technique, as we've done so often, is just a matter of practice. I'll take a slightly smaller knife. You hold your knife with your thumb and your fingers, and then you grip it with the rest of your fingers. You do never hold your knife with your finger over that because you can't wave it up and down as easily as if you hold it this way. And if you're not used to this professional chef's method, you may find it a little awkward at first, but you'll get used to it. And then you hold your thumb at the back of the mushroom and your fingers grip it, and your fingernails are pointed back. And then you just slice right straight down like this. You see your knife is coming down at an angle to the board. And then I want you to see when you've practiced how quickly it goes, so that you can slice up a group of mushrooms in no time at all. With the stem, you just hold the stem in the same way and slice right down. And there's another one. So if you've learned the slice and the grip, you'll find that you can do it very quickly. And these are, as I'm always pointing out to you, this kind of the kitchen dog work. You must learn how to do it quickly, because then it makes cooking so much more of a pleasure, and also you can take rather a pride in how you do things. Now, I have all of my mushrooms in here have been cleaned and washed, so I can just go right at them. Now, sometimes you have a recipe calling for quartered mushrooms. And if you have your stem attached with no gills showing, you can just take the mushroom and quarter the whole thing like this. And this also makes a very handsome mushroom. And then sometimes you will just have quartered caps, and if it's a fairly large cap like this, you would cut it in half and then cut the cap in several pieces. So it isn't really quartered, but it looks quartered. It just depends on what the size is. And then you can use the stem also, and this is a big fat one, so you cut it probably in quarters, and then you would cut those at an angle so that they look about like your quartered caps. I'll see if I can find a smaller one. There's a smaller one. So you cut it on the bias like this. And now your stem looks very much like your quartered cap. And those also go very quickly. If you were I'm going to take the stem off again so you'll remember. You just bend it. And then this is a small mushroom, so that just needs to have the cap quartered. And there you have quartered mushrooms, and those, when you're sauteing mushrooms, they're usually called to be quartered because they stay in larger pieces. And then you're often called for chopped mushrooms, and this is the same chopping that we've always used, and it's much best to take a great big knife and start them by cutting them up a bit, and then break them into somewhat smaller pieces. You have to be sure and have a sharp knife when you're doing chopping, because you want to actually chop the mushrooms and not mash them into a pulp. And then hold your knife in your two hands and just chop back and forth. Properly chopped mushrooms, it's never very fast to do, and you're supposed to chop them up usually very fine so that they're less than 1/16 of an inch. But if you've ever gone into a good restaurant, this noise of chop, 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 chop is always a rather welcome and familiar sound. So you keep gathering them up. And then keep right on chopping until you have them very fine. This again, if you were just learning to be a chef, you'd spend probably your first 2 or 3 years just chopping things. And then you'd be a real whiz at it. And then remember, when you're getting the mushrooms off, to get them off by going down the back of your knife, because if you went the other way, you just might cut off your hand, which would be too bad, and you wouldn't be able to chop mushrooms anymore. So those go into a dish. And we've done the main cutting method, so we're going to do something with whole caps, because there are lots of good recipes that you can do with whole mushroom caps. And one of the most decorative way is to flute mushrooms. And that's sometimes it's called in French, champignon tourné. And I've taken a mushroom and I've painted it with some brown meat extract so that you could really see what it looks like. And now I've fluted half of it, and what a fluting is to take a little bit of a skin off and leave a decorative ridge around the mushroom. You don't ever have to peel cultivated mushrooms, and this is just if you want to be really fancy and decorate. This is the kind of thing that I think you have to see and then you have to practice, because it seems to go in the opposite way that you would think. Now you have to have a very sharp, small knife, and you hold it in one hand, and you put your thumb you hold it so that your thumb rests on the cap of the mushroom, and then the mushroom you're holding with your other thumb on the cap, and you want to be able to do a movement back and forth like this. And you'll have your knife over the mushroom, and I'm just going to do 1 or 2 of these flutes so you can see what happens. You see I'm cutting off a bit of the skin here and making this little ridge. I should try and cut it so that, there, now that's a good one. You see how it's doing. And I'll cut another one, and then we'll try and go over what I was doing. Now, you see the thumb that's holding my knife is resting on this mushroom, and the knife, you see, it's sort of flat against the mushroom at a very slight angle. It's not cutting down into the mushroom this way. It's flat. And then my hand, the mushroom itself is cutting itself on the knife. In other words, I'm moving my knife hand very little, and the mushroom is cutting its cap against the edge of the knife. And I think when you start practicing this, remember that the mushroom cuts itself against the knife. It's not the action of the knife that's cutting the mushroom. There, now I'll do another one. I'll try to do this a little faster to see how it goes. You see, I'm bending the mushroom cap towards me this way, and my thumb is acting as, my 2 thumbs are anchors. The one I'm holding the knife is anchoring it's sort of guiding the mushroom and the knife. And this is the kind of thing that if you are determined you're going to flute mushrooms, you can do it. You just have to flute them every time that you have any mushrooms to chop or whatever else you're going to do with them. Just flute all the caps, and you'll get onto the theory of it. For most people, it takes them quite a bit of time of trying to do the mushroom, and then suddenly you get the feeling, and then you're able to do it. And so now we've done all these various cuttings, so we'll now do some cooking methods. And we're going to do first, let's see where I'm going to put that. We're going to do first some stewed mushrooms. And these are the kind of mushrooms that you use usually for fricassees, or you can cream them and use them on toast. And here are our sliced mushrooms. And you would usually, you can, for the fluted mushrooms, you would usually stew them too. So you put them in a little pan, and then you want just a small amount of water, because the mushrooms have their own liquid. For this amount, I'm just going to put in about 2 or 3 tablespoons. And then you want some butter. I've got lots of melted butter here, so I'll just put some in, just about a tablespoon. And then we have to have some lemon. And it's the lemon that's going to keep the mushrooms white. And this is an easy way of squeezing lemon. You have your impeccably clean towel, and you just put the lemon in the corner of the towel, and then just squeeze as much as you want in. You want about half a tablespoon in here or less. If you get too much lemon in, then you have sort of a citrony taste. And then we want a little bit of salt in there, probably about 1/4 of a tablespoonful. Got an awful lot there, so I just have to put in a little tiny bit. And then take your pan and just make the mushrooms jump a little bit so that they will be covered with the lemon juice and butter. And then cover the pan, and then these should cook at a slow boil for just about 8 minutes. And you can do this ahead of time, and when they're all done, take the cover off. I think I said too much salt in there. I had so much in my hand that would be just about 1/4 of a tablespoon. And I have some that are already done, and you see how they look. They shrink up quite a bit. I still am worried about that salt. Did I say a tablespoon? I meant 1/4 of a teaspoon. That's what I meant. Well, you could see how much I put in anyway. Now, these are all done, and these can be done ahead of time. And you have a nice little juice in here. And these I'm going to serve creamed, which is a very easy way to do. And I'm going to cream them in a very fast and easy way. And we're going to use some of this new granular flour, which is so easy to make a little thickening with, because you've got to thicken the sauce with your sauce with something. I'm going to put in about a teaspoonful. And be sure when you use it, you always put it in when the liquid is cold, and then stir it up. At least I always put it in when it's cold. Maybe I think I've had a slight case of lumping if I've put them in while the sauce was boiling. And then that should come up to the simmer, and simmer for just about a moment or two. It doesn't seem to be simmering yet. Well, and then you would put in some cream, which I can put in now. Well, I can put in more than a teaspoon, I think. This would depend on how much of your thickening you'd put in. You'd want to have just enough cream so that to thin it out so that it wasn't too thick. And then you want to let that simmer for just a minute or two, and then you can serve that on toast. And this makes a very nice little first course. You would simmer it a little bit longer than I have simmered it, but I don't, because you want the cream to have all of the flavor of the mushrooms. And that makes a very nice little first course. And with that, you could add one of your fluted mushrooms on top, and then people will be very much impressed indeed. So now we're going to do some sauteed mushrooms. And I'm going to use my no-stick pan on this. And with this, the saute, I think, are the most frequently done. These you can use as a first course or as a garniture. And I'm going to use, you would use either a mixture of butter or oil, or you would use clarified butter, because you don't want your butter to burn. You would have to fortify it with oil if it was plain, or if it's clarified. You see this is this clear butter. That's why it's called clarified. It doesn't have any of that little milky residue in the bottom of the pan. And you want to heat your butter so that it's bubbling hot. You want to be sure that your mushrooms are dry, and you do not want to crowd your pan. So that's hot now. So in go the mushrooms, and you can hear them sizzle, which means that they are hot. I could put in a few more mushrooms in this, but what you want them to do is to brown nicely, and you have not sauteed them correctly if any juice comes out in the pan. In other words, it means that they have steamed. So you will note, and the only way you can prevent them from steaming is by not putting in too many mushrooms at first. So remember, whenever you're sauteing, these 3 cardinal points. 1, your fat is very hot. 2, your mushrooms are dry. And 3, you do not crowd the pan. And you notice this no-stick pan is such a nice shape because it has a long handle and it has these high sides so that you can easily shake them. And learn to shake rather than to stir because it's much faster. And then I have some that are already done. It takes about 5 minutes to saute them, and you can saute them ahead. And then after they've sauteed, put on a little bit of salt, and then you would always add, for the reheating for about a moment, about a tablespoon of minced shallots. And then if you wanted to finish them up a la bordelaise, you could squeeze in a bit of garlic if you like it. And you only put the garlic and the shallots in at the last moment because you don't want them to burn. And then you would put in some chopped parsley. And you could also add a few breadcrumbs because the breadcrumbs mixed up with the butter is very nice. So that's a very quick finish, and they're all ready to serve. And those you could serve on toast, or you could serve them as a garniture. Now I've got so many pans, I've got to get rid of some. And these are awfully nice if you want to serve them around sauteed chicken or sauteed game. And I like them very much as just a first course with mushrooms. So now, and if you're going to serve, if you're going to do your chopped mushrooms, which I'm not going to do because you do them exactly the same way, you would saute them in the same system, exactly. So now I'm going to get ready to do our grand finale, which are going to be the champignons sous cloche, or mushrooms under glass. And I think this is a recipe that you're going to enjoy because it's very quick and fast to do. And here's all the setup for them. You're going to see how quick this is to assemble, though it sounds as though it were a very difficult dish. I have here 2 little rounds of white bread that have been sauteed in butter, so they go on 2 fireproof dishes. And then I have 1 enormous mushroom here, so that will be nice for 1 serving. And the thing is that these are going to cook on the toast, and they're going to be flavored, and then they're going to be cooked in the oven, and you want the mushrooms to stay on the toast. So peel off a little bit from the bottom of the mushroom, and then it will sit on the toast without falling off. And this one is going to have 3 small-sized mushrooms, so I'm shaving off a little bit from each one. So they're sitting nicely on the toast. And then they're going to be filled with what is known as a maître d'hôtel butter. And all of that is softened butter that's mixed with some lemon juice and parsley, and usually a little bit of chopped shallot or green onions. I've got about, say, 2 tablespoons of butter there, and I'm putting in about a tablespoon of parsley and a half tablespoon of shallot, and then it should have a little pepper in. And then you're going to salt the cavities of the mushrooms very lightly. And then we're going to squeeze in some lemon juice. Now I should stir that up first. And if the butter softens, you can just stir it up and mash it up with a rubber spatula. This is the kind of butter you can use on steaks or fish or all kinds of things. And then again, we want some lemon. So we'll use our same impeccably clean towel squeezer. And this will have about a teaspoon of lemon, and this should add a little bit of it at a time. If you add too much, it gets it doesn't mash up the way it should. It gets sort of watery. And now I'm leaving the stem on this big mushroom just because I think it's rather dramatic. And then you put your maître d'hôtel butter into the mushrooms. And this is an Escoffier recipe. And he says, gros comme une noix de beurre, which means big as a walnut of butter. And then you put in a little teaspoon of heavy cream into each one. And then as soon as it's done, as soon as you fill them, you put on your cloche. And these cloches or bells you can buy in a restaurant supply place or at one of the French importing houses. They cost a little over $2. If you don't have a cloche, you can use any kind of a bowl. I haven't filled this mushroom because I just wanted you to see this also. You would put on any kind of a fireproof bowl, and you can cook in that, and then you'd remove it when you were done. And so, when these are all ready, and you can get these ready way ahead of time, you put them in the oven, and they go into a 325-degree oven, and they cook for just about exactly 25 minutes. These went in just when we began, and they have cooked for just 25 minutes, and they're just done. You don't want to overcook them because you don't want the mushrooms to lose their shape. And so these are all now ready to serve. And you can see for a dish that sounds so terribly fancy how awfully quick that is to assemble. But be sure that after you've put them in the oven that you serve them as soon as the 25 minutes is done. So here we are with our champignons sous cloche, and we're all ready to eat them. And each guest has his own cloche, if that's what you're using, and then he takes his napkin and he lifts up the cloche or bell, and there are your mushrooms. Seeing them all steaming, and they haven't cooked so long that they have lost their shape. They're just really perfect. And sometimes if you put the bell back on it again, it goes bubble, bubble. In this case, it doesn't. And then you always want to have a little dish to put the cloche on. So you can see if your maids and butlers have gone and taken the day off, you can still put on the dog and have champignon sous cloche. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.